She didn't see a child in 3A. She saw a problem she thought no one important would defend. Zuri Amanpour was just excited to fly with her dad. Her first big trip. Her favorite backpack. Her sparkly dreams. But when a first-class flight attendant decided Zuri didn't belong, her quiet cruelty set off a chain of events she couldn't control. What was supposed to be a smooth overseas flight turned into something far more turbulent, and by the time the plane landed, one thing was clear. Power doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a soft smile and carries a name that changes everything. Before we go any further, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story might just make you rethink everything. We don't usually serve juice boxes in first class, sweetheart. The words dropped like pebbles into silence, delicate enough to be mistaken for kindness if you weren't listening too closely. But Karen Whitmore wasn't trying to be kind. Her voice, crisp and lacquered with phony cheer, was aimed straight at the little black girl in seat 2A7. Years old, hair in soft braids with purple beads that clicked faintly when she moved, backpack hugging her chest like a shield. The kind of child who says thank you too quickly and smiles too big, just to make adults feel more comfortable. Erin didn't smile back. She just stood there in her spotless navy uniform, perfect blonde bob helmeted tight around her head, with that practiced poise only 30 years in the air could teach you. Her hands were clasped in front of her tray, her nameplate gleaming. Whitmore, Senior Purser. Zuri blinked up at her. "I like juice boxes," she said, softly. Karen tilted her head, just enough to make it seem like a gesture of patience. "I'm sure you do, sweetie. But in first class, we usually serve beverages in proper glassware. You wouldn't want to spill anything now, would you?" Her eyes flicked quickly, but not fast enough towards seat 2B. The man sitting next to Zuri hadn't looked up yet. He was reviewing a document on a sleek tablet, leather-bound, silver initials embossed in the corner, D.A. Karen didn't know what DD stood for. She didn't care. To her, he was just another overconfident black man who probably had miles saved up from some tech job. And the little girl? She was just another child brought into a cabin she didn't belong in. Because in Karen's mind, first class wasn't about where your ticket said you could sit. It was about where she thought you belonged. He looked up. "Excuse me," he said, gently but firmly. His voice was like still water with depth you didn't see until you stepped too far. "My daughter would like what she asked for. Apple juice, if you have it, in whatever container's safest." Karen smiled tightly, that thin hostess smile. "Of course, sir. I just meant it might be easier for her to manage." "She'll manage," he said, calm, controlled, but his eyes did not blink. Karen turned, her heels whispering against the plush aisle carpet as she walked off. Zuri leaned in toward her father. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby," he whispered, his hand wrapping around hers like a protective branch. "She just doesn't know who you are." And neither did Karen, because if she had, if she'd bothered to glance at the company newsletter or read one of the corporate memos flying around every cabin crew inbox, she would have known that Dr. Derek Amanpour, sitting quietly in 2B, wasn't just another first-class traveler. He was the new CEO of Jetstream Aviation Holdings, the company that owned Orion Skies, the airline she worked for. But Karen never looked closely at passengers like him. She had seen enough over her years to make snap judgments. Too many, really. She had grown used to being right in her own mind, and when she was challenged, especially by people like Derek, it felt like rebellion, an offense to her invisible crown. Zuri returned to staring out the window. Her small fingers ran over the sequined horn of her unicorn backpack, the kind that shimmered purple and silver when you brushed it. The plane hadn't left the gate yet. The sky outside was cloudless, the kind of sky that made people believe in smooth landings. But not Derek. He had already noticed the tone, The drop in Karen's pitch when she said, "Sir," the narrowing of her eyes when she scanned his seat, the stiffness in her posture, like she had something to prove just by standing still. He recognized it. He had spent his whole life learning how to. Karen returned with a glass. Not a juice box, but a short, wide tumbler filled nearly to the brim with apple juice. No lid, no straw. "I trust she'll be careful," she said, placing it down with the gentle sarcasm of a chess piece falling into check. Zuri reached for it slowly, both hands cradling the glass like it was spun sugar. The beads in her braids clicked again. As she brought it to her lips, the plane jolted slightly, a maintenance tug detaching from the undercarriage. A splash hit her unicorn backpack. Karen tisked. "Oh dear. See what I meant?" she said, already pulling a cocktail napkin from her apron. "It's okay, Zuri began, but Karen had already begun dabbing at the spill with the exaggerated panic of someone tending to a broken arm, not a drop of juice. "These seats are leather, you know," Karen added, "and stains, well, they don't come out easily." Derek's hand moved slowly, not fast, not angry, but deliberate. He removed the glass from his daughter's hands and set it back on the tray. "That'll be enough," he said. Karen straightened, smile gone. "I'm simply trying to preserve the experience for our premium guests, sir." "She is a premium guest." Derek's voice was like cooled steel. Karen said nothing. She just turned, stiff as starch, and walked away. Zuri's eyes were wide again, but not with excitement this time. She bit her lip. Derek leaned over, brushing the back of her head with his palm. "You didn't do anything wrong." She looked at me like I did. "She's wrong." Outside, the plane started taxiing. The engines hummed, a sound that usually promised adventure. But in Derek's chest, something had shifted. He had dealt with racists, with skeptics, with polished gatekeepers in billion-dollar boardrooms who didn't think a black man could out-negotiate them until he already had. But there was something different about being thousands of feet in the air, trapped in a metal tube with someone who could smile while destroying you. He closed his eyes. He had planned this trip for months, Zuri's first time abroad. They were going to see Big Ben, ride a red bus, eat fish and chips by the Thames. She had circled all the places in the guidebook herself. But now he had to prepare for war, the quiet kind, the kind fought with posture and poise, not weapons. The kind where your little girl looks up at you not because she's excited about the clouds, but because she needs to know she's safe. He opened his eyes and stared straight ahead, already calculating his next move. By the time the seatbelt sign pinged and the wheels lifted off the Dallas tarmac, Karen Whitmore had already decided two things. First, she didn't like that man in 2B. Second, she was going to make sure he knew it. She didn't say it aloud, of course, she never did. That was the thing about people like Karen. There was a talent in their hostility. It was in the tone, not the words. In the way she handed you a napkin like it was a favor. In how she spoke to others in her section, warmly, laughing. And how she approached 2A and 2B like she'd just stepped in something she didn't want to track across the carpet. She moved through the aisle now, with her shoulders squared, like she was bracing for turbulence that hadn't come. Her service cart was lined perfectly, champagne flutes polished, silver tongues gleaming. She offered warm towels to the elderly couple in 1A and 1B, with a small flourish. "Here you are, Mr. and Mrs. Lowell. Enjoy." Her smile was butter. When she reached row 2, it hardened into margarine. "Towel?" she asked flatly. Derek looked up from the book he'd been reading aloud to Zuri. Something about a rabbit with magic boots. He gave a polite nod. Karen extended the towel with the sort of delicacy reserved for hazardous materials. Zari whispered a thank you, and Karen didn't respond. She moved on. From the galley near the front, a younger flight attendant emerged. Marisol Vega, just 2 years into the job and already nominated twice for staff excellence. Her voice was a warm alto, her posture soft and unhurried. She slipped into the aisle with quiet confidence, checking her manifest. As she passed Karen, the senior purser didn't even glance over. "Keep an eye on 2A, Karen muttered under her breath. Marisol blinked. "Excuse me?" "Just be alert. Some kids get overwhelmed on long hauls. We don't need juice on the carpet again." Marisol turned her head slightly. She hadn't seen the incident, but the way Karen's jaw was set, it was enough to raise a small flag in her mind. She nodded once and continued down the aisle. Derek noticed it, all of it, the whispering, the way Karen didn't make eye contact, the micro-choreography of discomfort. He exhaled. He wasn't paranoid, he wasn't reading into things. He was an expert in this language. It had spoken to him his entire life. When he was in college, and the professor asked if he was auditing the class. When he was walking to his car in a suit and someone assumed he was the valet. When he stood at a board meeting table, the only black face among 10 white men, and they mistook him for a client rather than the man who had just been appointed to lead them. Now it was speaking again. Only this time, it was whispering in his daughter's ears, too. Zuri had taken out her coloring book, flipping past unicorns and castles to a page with a dragon breathing stars instead of fire. Her glitter pens were lined up on the tray like little jewels, but her hand hesitated over the gold one. The joy had thinned. She looked up. "Daddy, is she mad at me?" Derek folded his tablet shut and leaned toward her. "No, Zek, she's just not very good at her job." Zuri nodded, not quite convinced. He let the moment pass. Didn't push. He had learned the hard way that explanations don't always comfort. Sometimes they just give children more questions that don't have good answers. Dinner service began an hour later. Karen resumed her performance at the front of the cabin. Graceful, engaging, flirtatiously funny with the older men in row 1. Her voice rose in little chiming notes of hospitality as she described the options for dinner: garlic herb chicken, seared salmon with dill cream, vegetarian curry with saffron rice. When she reached row 2 again, the light dimmed. Derek requested the salmon. Zuri wanted the pasta. Erin paused, just long enough to make it awkward. "She wants the pasta?" she asked, eyes narrowing at the little girl. "Yes," Derek replied. "We looked at the menu earlier." "It's rich," Karen said. "Cream sauce. Some children have trouble keeping it down." "She'll be fine." Erin said nothing, but the twitch in her eye told its own story. She disappeared into the galley. Returned 2 minutes later with 2 trays, his handed with polished control, hers with a slight jerk that caused the ceramic salt shaker to wobble and tip over. Salt spilled onto the floor. Erin sighed. Loud. Like a punchline. "Oh no. We'll have to get the vacuum. These things get everywhere." Zuri's eyes widened. "I didn't." "I know." Derek cut in, his tone gentle but edged. "I watched the tray. She didn't touch it. You spilled it." Karen didn't look at him. Didn't apologize, just walked away, mumbling about procedure and standards. The businessman across the aisle glanced up and then buried his face in his laptop. But Marisol, further down the cabin, caught the entire exchange, her brow knit together. Something wasn't right. Karen returned moments later with a handheld vacuum and, while cleaning the salt, muttered just loud enough for others to hear, "Some people think first class means first priority." Zuri looked like she'd been slapped. Derek set his fork down. He turned in his seat, facing Karen directly. His posture was still, but his voice had sharpened. "My daughter is a paying passenger. This is her seat. She has every right to enjoy this flight without commentary or interference. If you're not able to provide professional service, we'll request another attendant handle this section." Karen froze. For just a heartbeat. Then her eyes narrowed. "I am the senior purser. This is my cabin." "Then act like it." His words were soft, but they dropped like stones. Karen stiffened, her mouth twitched. She walked away again, this time straight to the front of the plane. He could see her speaking in hushed tones with the pilot, gesturing, whispering. He leaned back in his seat, then reached over and tucked a strand of braid behind Zuri's ear. "You're okay, Z?" She nodded, but the sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. He didn't want this to be her memory of flying. Not the coloring books or the stars outside the window, not the cookies he'd promised at the hotel, but the woman who saw her like she was a threat, in sneakers. He looked toward the galley. Karen had underestimated him. Most people did. But what she didn't know, what she hadn't even bothered to ask, was that Derek Amanpour didn't just belong in seat 2B. He owned the entire aisle she was walking down. The meal trays had been cleared, lights dimmed, a hush fell over the first-class cabin as the jet cruised smooth and high above the Atlantic, slicing through night like a silver ghost. Most of the passengers leaned back into the lull, reclining their seats, wrapping themselves in blankets, sipping quietly at half-finished glasses of wine. But Derek Amanpour wasn't sleeping. He kept his seat upright, his legs crossed neatly at the ankle. One hand rested lightly on the armrest. The other remained close to Zuri, who had finally, mercifully, dozed off. Her head was curled into the crook of his arm. Her unicorn backpack nestled beside her, now dry from earlier, but faintly marked with a small shadow of the water Susan had spilled. No, not Susan. Karen. He needed to stop calling her Susan in his mind. That was the name printed on the tag in the storybook he read to Zuri at takeoff. Susan the friendly flight fairy. This woman in his cabin, with her lemon-pressed smile and white-knuckle grip on authority, was no fairy. She was something else, and Derek wasn't imagining it. He'd experienced rudeness before, brushed off comments, side glances, slow service. But this wasn't simple rudeness. This was targeted, calculated. It had turned the cabin into a performance, and Zuri had been cast as the disruption without ever auditioning. He glanced across the aisle. A man in a crisp gray suit, early 50s, maybe, was reading a Wall Street journal. No earbuds, no movie, just the slow turning of pages. At one point earlier, the man had glanced up during the salt shaker incident. Their eyes had met. Now he was looking anywhere but back. Derek didn't blame him. People were good at pretending not to see what made them uncomfortable. He gently adjusted the blanket over Zuri, making sure her headphones were snug. She was watching something animated, the colors flickering across her face in soft pulses. She didn't even notice when the curtain to the galley rustled again. Karen was back. She didn't say anything at first, just checked the overhead bins, pretended to inspect the curtain seams, but he could feel her eyes crawling over him. And then she paused just beside his seat, hovering like a question no one had asked. "I'd like to clarify something," she said. Her voice was sugar, but the granules were sharp. Derek didn't move. "Is that right?" "Yes," she said, shifting slightly, hand gripping the seat back in front of her. "I want you to know that my concern earlier was for safety, that's all. We have protocols, standards, and I take those very seriously, first class or not." "Your concern," Derek said evenly, "has been noted." Karen frowned. "I think you may have misinterpreted my tone." "No," he replied, finally turning to meet her eyes. "I heard your tone just fine." Something shifted in her expression. Her smile faltered. Just a fraction. "This flight has a very diverse clientele," she said, straightening. "We pride ourselves on treating everyone with equal care." "Funny," Derek said softly. "I didn't feel that pride when you handed my daughter her glass like it was a bomb." Karen's jaw tensed. "Sir, I don't appreciate the insinuation." Then don't offer it to children. She took a breath. He could see her mentally flipping through her internal manual, trying to find a rule, a policy, a phrase that would place her back in control. But there was nothing in the script for this. For a black man who didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't cower, but calmly, confidently met her power with his own. "I'll speak to the captain if this continues," she said. "I think you already have," Derek replied, glancing subtly toward the cockpit. "Haven't you?" Karen didn't answer, but her eyes flickered. A tell. She turned and walked away. This time she didn't return. About 20 minutes later, Marisol came by, quiet, polite, and far more present than Karen had ever managed. She offered Zuri a small cup of vanilla ice cream with rainbow sprinkles. No fuss, no lecture. Just kindness. Derek smiled at her. She smiled back. When Zuri woke up to the ice cream, her face lit up with a drowsy kind of wonder. "Daddy? How did she know I wanted sprinkles?" "Magic," he said gently, brushing a curl from her forehead. She nodded, like that made perfect sense. As she dug in with her little spoon, Derek leaned his head back again. He needed to think. He had a few hours left in the sky, a few hours to decide what this moment would become. He wasn't naive. A complaint was one option, a letter to HR, a report. But Karen had escalated things. This wasn't about a meal tray anymore. It wasn't about salt or tone. It was about what she had seen when she looked at him, and what she had refused to see when she looked at his daughter. There were rules up here, 30,000 feet in the air, unwritten ones. Karen believed in them, believed in the idea that people like Derek didn't really belong in 2B, that Zuri was out of place, that maybe, just maybe, if she could irritate them enough, they'd retreat to silence. But the rules had changed, and by the time they landed, she was going to learn that. What she thought was a game of quiet power was about to become a public lesson in what real power looked like. Derek didn't have to raise his voice. He just had to let the truth speak louder than her assumptions. And once they were on the ground, he'd make sure that truth had a name. Zuri was asleep again, one hand curled around the empty cup of sprinkles like it was something sacred. Her headphones had slipped slightly, letting soft music escape into the hush of the cabin. Derek carefully eased the earbuds off and placed them on her tray, brushing a finger over her cheek before turning his attention forward. His eyes were open, but his mind was elsewhere. He saw the problem before he heard it. Karen was at the front of the cabin, again. Her back was to the passengers, her voice low, her movements animated. She wasn't whispering, but she wasn't yelling either. The kind of voice people use when they want to look calm but sound alarmed. And she wasn't alone. This time the cockpit door had cracked open. The captain, an older man with silver in his temples, stood just inside the frame. He nodded slowly, arms folded. He didn't look convinced, but he also didn't look like he was about to challenge her. Not yet. Karen's posture was stiff, but there was a subtle urgency in her hands as they gestured midair, cutting down, slicing sideways, painting pictures with words Derek couldn't hear but could almost guess. She wasn't reporting a service issue, she was building a story. Derek adjusted his seat and leaned toward the aisle, careful not to draw attention but still needing a better angle. He caught just enough to confirm what he suspected. Her hand gestured toward their row. "Yes, Zuri's." The captain's eyes flicked back. A quick glance. Professional, practiced, calculating. Derek sat back slowly, heart rate steady. He'd seen this play before. There was always a Karen, and there was always someone willing to listen just enough to believe her without question. The details didn't matter. What mattered was that she was uncomfortable, that she felt threatened. That was always the magic word, threatened. It didn't matter if no threat existed. All that mattered was that someone like her said it did. A moment later she turned, her face composed again, the theater mask back in place. She stepped through the curtain, past business class, and into economy like a queen, inspecting her lesser subjects. The captain closed the cockpit door slowly, like someone who wasn't sure what side of the truth he'd just agreed to. Marisol passed by a few minutes later with a tray of warm towels. Her movements were quiet, efficient. But when she reached Derek, she paused, crouched slightly, and placed a towel on his tray with a whisper barely above breath. "I think something's happening." Derek looked at her, calm, steady. "With Karen?" She nodded quickly. Her eyes flicked toward the galley. "She made a call from the sat phone, said it was an escalating situation. I heard something about authorities at landing." Zuri stirred lightly in her sleep, murmuring a dream sound. Derek smoothed her blanket. "Thank you for telling me." Marisol hesitated. "She's saying you were confrontational, that you were raising your voice, that your daughter was disruptive." Derek finished for her. She swallowed. "Yes." He nodded once. "Did you correct her?" "I wanted to, but she's lead on this route." He studied Marisol's face. She wasn't lying. She was scared, not of him, but of the hierarchy, of the system, of what happened to people who stepped outside the line, even if it was the right thing. "It's okay," Derek said quietly. "You've done more than enough. You've treated my daughter with kindness. I won't forget that." She lingered for another second, then nodded and moved on. Derek sat back and exhaled slowly, eyes closing for just a moment. He wasn't surprised, not anymore. Disappointed, yes, but not surprised. Karen didn't want an apology. She wanted a punishment. She wasn't content with being annoyed. She needed to be avenged. And she thought the system would carry her sword for her. He reached under his seat, pulled out his tablet, and powered it on. The time flashed on screen. Just over an hour until descent. Good. Still time to prepare. He opened his email, typed a short note to the airline's general counsel, and CC'd the VP of operations. Just a subject line and one sentence. "I suspect we may have a situation upon landing involving a misunderstanding on flight OS 1186. He signed it. The Amanpur Chief Executive Officer, Jetstream Aviation Holdings. Then he locked the screen and placed the tablet back in its case. Zuri stirred again. "Daddy?" "I'm here, sweetheart." "Are we there yet?" "Almost." "You okay?" She rubbed her eyes and nodded. "I had a dream we were riding dragons, but mine was purple, yours was black and gold." Derek smiled. "Sounds about right." She leaned into him again. "Can we still get ice cream in London?" "Absolutely." He kissed the top of her head, held her close, and stared straight ahead. The cabin had grown tense again. Not obviously, not like a movie where everyone gasps and turns, but in the subtle ways. The stillness, the forced coughs, the sideways glances from the man across the aisle. Even Mrs. Granger from row 4 looked unsettled, shifting in her seat and peeking over the top of her book. Something was coming, and when it landed, it wouldn't just be about spilled water or salt or tone. It would be about who was allowed to sit in seat 2B and who people still believed didn't belong there. It would be about Zuri's unicorn backpack and how it drew side-eyes when it should have drawn smiles. Derek watched the lights on the aisle dim further. The seatbelt signs flickered. Cabin crew began prep for landing. He wrapped an arm around his daughter. She settled into him, safe for now. But he knew his story wasn't ending in the air. It was about to begin the moment the wheels touched the ground. The first jolt of the landing gear hitting the tarmac woke Zuri with a soft gasp. Her head snapped up, wide eyes searching the window for signs of London. Derek steadied her gently, hand on her back, voice low and warm. "We're here, baby girl. Almost." Outside, the gray light of early morning poured across the runway like diluted silver. The clouds hung low, dull and heavy, mirroring the weight pressing into Derek's chest. The aircraft taxied slower than usual. It didn't drift straight to the gate like normal. Instead, it pulled off toward a distant patch of tarmac away from the terminal. Derek sat up straighter. This wasn't standard. Zuri leaned toward the window. "Where's the airport?" "It's coming, just a different stop first," he said softly, not taking his eyes off the direction they were headed. He saw them before anyone else did. 2 airport police vehicles were parked beside a service van, lights swirling in silent rotation. Blue and red glimmers danced along the wet concrete, and between them, 3 uniformed officers stood, arms folded, eyes locked on the approaching plane. Zuri's voice was barely a whisper. "Others. Police." Derek didn't answer. The intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice came through, but gone was the polite, cheerful cadence from earlier. It was now stiff, sterile, filtered through protocol. "Ladies and gentlemen, for your safety and the security of the crew, we ask that all passengers remain seated with their seatbelts fastened. Please do not retrieve your belongings at this time. The authorities will be boarding the aircraft momentarily. We appreciate your cooperation." A thick, confused murmur spread through the cabin. Derek didn't move. His grip on Zuri's shoulder tightened just slightly. He could feel Karen's eyes on him even before he turned. She stood near the cockpit, her arms crossed, a clipboard in hand she didn't need. Her chin was raised. That mask of concern she wore earlier was gone, replaced by something smug, triumphant. This was her moment. The silence inside the cabin was total. It was the kind of stillness that only comes when everyone is trying not to stare at something they're desperate to see. The cabin door opened with a metallic hiss. Cold air slipped in, and with it came 2 officers in dark navy uniforms, one older and stiff, the other younger, scanning the room with uncertain eyes. They stepped in like they were entering hostile ground. Karen stepped forward, extending an arm as if she were rescuing the very aircraft itself. "That's him," she said clearly, dramatically, her finger pointing down the aisle. "Row 2, the man and his child." 60 heads turned at once. Zuri flinched, the sudden attention hitting her like a wave. Derek turned his body slightly, shielding her with his own. The officers exchanged a quick glance. The senior one cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Shaw with Halston Airport Security. We've been asked to speak with you about an incident during the flight. Could you please come with us?" Derek didn't stand. Not yet. "I have my daughter with me," he said calmly. "She's 7. She's frightened. I'd appreciate if we could handle this without making a scene." The younger officer shifted awkwardly. The sergeant kept his voice level but firm. "Of course, sir. Just gather your things and come with us quietly." Zuri's hand clutched Derek's arm tighter. "Daddy." He leaned down, brushed a tear from her cheek. "It's okay, little star. We're just going to talk to some people, then we'll go get that ice cream you wanted." Zuri nodded, lips trembling, trying to be brave. Derek stood, reached for the overhead bin, and pulled down their carry-on bags with slow, deliberate motions. All around them, passengers pretended not to stare, but failed miserably. He stepped into the aisle. Mrs. Granger rose from her seat in row 4. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, the kind that made people pause. "Officers, I believe this is a mistake." Sergeant Shaw blinked. "Ma'am?" "That man has been nothing but respectful the entire flight," she said. "And his daughter hasn't said a word louder than a whisper. That flight attendant," she pointed directly at Karen, "has been needling them from the moment we boarded. I watched it happen." The younger officer looked between them. For a second, his certainty wavered. "Thank you, ma'am," the sergeant said curtly. "We'll take it from here." "No, you're not listening," she insisted. You're humiliating a child based on one woman's word. That's not safety, that's prejudice. Karen bristled. That's enough, miss. No, Mrs. Granger snapped, her voice cutting like glass. You've said enough. Derek turned to her, nodding once. Thank you. He stepped into the jet bridge with Zuri clinging to his hand. Behind them the whispers began again, louder now, laced with confusion and doubt. Phones came out, screens lit up. Outside the plane a third officer waited. Next to him stood a short man in a gray suit, with an Orion Skies badge clipped to his lapel. Trevor Daniels, the station manager. His face was pale and pinched, the look of someone who'd been warned there was trouble coming, but hadn't known it would wear a $2,000 0-cents cashmere sweater. Karen followed them out, voice already turning to syrup again. Thank you, officers. He was becoming very confrontational. I was genuinely concerned. Derek stopped. The mask dropped. He turned to face Trevor Daniels. The station manager opened his mouth, but no words came. Derek reached inside his blazer, calmly withdrew a heavy matte black business card. He handed it to Trevor. No explanation. No need. The card did the speaking. Derek Amanpour, Chief Executive Officer, Jetstream Aviation Holdings. Trevor's eyes scanned the card once, twice. His face drained of color. His breath hitched. Karen frowned. What does it say? Derek didn't even look at her. It says, he said, voice low and clear, that I'm the CEO of the company that owns this airline. The jet bridge froze. The officers shifted uncomfortably. Trevor took a full step back, and for the first time, Karen Whitmore looked scared. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her cheeks, once flushed with self-importance, had drained to the color of chalk. Her perfect posture faltered, as though the air itself had shifted, pressing down on her with the weight of truth. She wasn't looking at a disgruntled passenger anymore. She was staring into the eyes of the man who could erase her entire career with a phone call. Derek didn't blink. Trevor, he said evenly, do you recognize the name on that card? Trevor Daniels nodded, almost imperceptibly, the card still trembling slightly in his fingers. Yes, sir, I've seen the internal announcements. I didn't expect. You didn't expect me to be black. Derek's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The stillness of it made it worse. Trevor stammered. No, sir, I mean, no, that's not what I... Stop, Derek said, one hand up. Save it. I have a daughter to protect. Zuri, still clinging to her father's arm, looked up at the adults surrounding them, confusion clouding her eyes. She didn't understand boardroom titles or corporate hierarchies. All she knew was that the woman who'd been mean to her all flight now looked like a balloon with the air let out, crumpled and lost. Sergeant Shaw cleared his throat, trying to reinsert himself into a situation that had just turned far too complex. Dr. Amanpour, if I may... You may not, Derek said flatly, his voice still calm, still precise. You may not touch my daughter. You may not question me. You may not make another decision until my legal team is present. The younger officer stepped slightly behind his sergeant, as if trying to disappear into the wall. Trevor Daniels finally spoke. Dr. Amanpour, on behalf of Orion Skies and Jetstream Holdings, I sincerely apologize. We were unaware. Trevor, Derek interrupted, still not raising his voice. You were made aware the moment I stepped onto that plane. Not because of my name on a memo, but because of how I was treated, and you did nothing. Karen finally found her voice again, brittle and thin. I didn't know. You didn't need to know who I was, Derek said, turning his gaze on her. You just needed to know I was a human being. You couldn't even do that. Karen looked like she might collapse. Inside the aircraft, heads had begun to peek into the aisle, passengers straining to hear what was happening just outside the door. A few phones were still recording. The story was already writing itself. Mrs. Granger stepped out onto the jet bridge, arms folded across her chest. "I'll be writing a statement," she said firmly, directing it at Sergeant Shaw and Trevor. "And I'm happy to testify under oath, if it comes to that." Trevor swallowed hard. "We'll be launching a full internal review. You'll be launching a public apology," Derek said, stepping forward slightly. "And as of now, Ms. Whitmore is relieved of duty. I expect her credentials revoked by noon." Karen gasped. "You can't do that." "And just that." He turned to the officers. "You may escort her off the premises kindly, please. I don't want a spectacle. But she will not return to duty. Ever." Karen's breath hitched as her eyes darted between the faces of the officers, Trevor, and the now fully present VP who had just arrived at a jog, his suit jacket flapping behind him like a flag of surrender. "Dr. Amanpour," the VP, an older white man with salt and pepper hair and panic in his eyes, called breathlessly. "We were just—" There was a welcome committee prepared. VIP lounge, press photos. "I don't understand what—" Derek handed Zuri's small roller bag to her and gently guided her away from the growing crowd. "I understand perfectly," he said, "and you're going to cancel all of it, because right now I don't want a red carpet. I want accountability, and I want a quiet room where I can hold my daughter without wondering if someone else is going to accuse her of being a threat." The VP nodded too many times, like a man who thought nodding could fix a collapsed bridge. Derek's eyes moved back to Karen. "You judged my daughter before she even said a word. You saw her skin and made decisions. You saw me and assumed hostility. You used your position as a weapon." Karen blinked, but tears didn't come. She was too far into disbelief. "You said I was becoming hostile," Derek continued. "You lied. You crafted a narrative. You used law enforcement not for protection but for punishment. And the worst part? You never expected consequences." Trevor stepped aside, gesturing toward the door that led off the tarmac. "Ms. Whitmore? Please." She moved like a sleepwalker. With every step, the weight of what she'd done seemed to press harder on her spine. As she passed Derek and Zuri, she hesitated. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said softly. "That's the problem," Derek said, still not looking at her. "It always gets this far." She left. The officers followed. The VP led Derek and Zuri toward a quieter wing of the airport, one typically reserved for dignitaries and celebrities. It wasn't opulence that Derek wanted now. It was quiet. Clean air. A space to breathe. In the lounge, Zuri curled into her father's lap. He didn't speak. He just held her, head against hers, one hand gently stroking the crown of her head. She finally whispered, "Did we do something wrong?" "No, little star," he murmured. "We did everything right. Someone else didn't." She nestled closer. "I want to go home." Derek closed his eyes. "We will, but first, we're going to fix this." Outside the lounge, the PR team was already assembling. HR reps were dialing in, legal was connecting from Atlanta, but inside, for one brief moment, Derek didn't care about any of it. All that mattered was the girl in his arms. She wasn't just his daughter. She was his why. Derek's back was straight, one leg crossed over the other, a steaming cup of mint tea untouched on the side table next to him. Across from him sat a junior legal associate, patched in via a tablet screen, nervously adjusting his glasses every time Derek's gaze met the camera. Robert Klein, the airline's VP, paced behind the assistant, whispering instructions off-screen. Derek could hear every word, every frantic, face-saving instruction. He didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. Zuri had fallen asleep on a velvet couch nearby, wrapped in a fleece blanket printed with tiny airplanes and clouds, her pink headphones still playing soft music from Derek's tablet. The attendant had brought cookies shaped like stars. She'd tried to smile again, tried to be brave, but she hadn't touched a single cookie. Across the room, Trevor Daniels sat small in a corner chair, no longer the bustling station manager. His tablet rested on his knees, unopened. Every few minutes he looked toward Derek and then quickly looked away, like a child caught cheating on a test. "I've reviewed the flight logs," Derek said, breaking the heavy silence, "including the crew notes. Nothing in there mentions any disturbances until well after service began. The only record of disruption is Miss Whitmore's report, submitted after she was told not to interact with my row." The associate swallowed audibly. "That's correct, sir." "Then why did no one corroborate her claims before calling armed officers to the jet bridge?" Robert stepped into frame. "Dr. Amanpour, we acknowledge the breakdown in protocol. We had taken it very seriously. The captain followed internal procedure based on the purser's report." "The captain followed prejudice," Derek snapped, quiet but razor-sharp. "He didn't ask for a second opinion. He didn't check with any other crew member, and he certainly didn't speak to me. What if I hadn't had a business card to drop like a bomb? What if I was just a father flying home with his child trying to make a memory?" The silence that followed made the room feel colder than it had any right to be. "I don't want a PR-crafted apology or a donation to a random fund. I want change," Derek continued. "Policy-level change, and not just for your airline, for every brand under Jetstream's umbrella, every policy, every training, every complaint log. I want it on my desk by next week, reviewed, rewritten, rebuilt." Robert didn't argue. "And one more thing," Derek said, turning slightly. "There was a woman in seat 4C, Ellen Granger. She stood up when no one else did. I want her upgraded to lifetime status, first class, any flight, any route." Trevor nodded faintly. "She saw me," Derek said, more to himself than anyone else, "before the card, before the name." The associate adjusted his mic. "Sir, if I may, what do you intend to do about the police response?" Derek stood, slowly, careful not to wake Zuri. He walked to the window, watching the sky begin to soften with morning light. Planes rolled across the distant tarmac like silent giants, unaware of the earthquake that had just happened inside their walls. "I intend to press charges," he said without hesitation. "False reporting, emotional distress, and I'll file a formal complaint with the department regarding use of force procedures and racial profiling." The associate looked ready to faint. "Sir, I don't think—" "That's the problem," Derek said, turning back. "You don't think. You react. You follow reports. You believe the first white voice in the room, and you treat the first black body as a suspect. You operate as if authority is truth, when truth should be the authority." Robert straightened his tie. "We'll support the investigation, whatever you need." Derek stared him down. "You'll more than support it. You'll fund the Amara Initiative." Trevor blinked. "What's that?" "My daughter's name," Derek said softly, glancing toward her. "It'll be a foundation. We'll start with scholarships, then training programs, police, airline staff, corporate teams. Everyone, not just DEI boxes to check. Real, evidence-based bias recognition and de-escalation. Built on what happened today. Built on the truth." The room went quiet again, not out of resistance, but reverence. Derek didn't speak for several seconds. He let the gravity of what he was creating settle into the room like wet cement. "And Karen Whitmore?" Robert asked carefully. "She's already finished," Derek said. "But I don't want her scrubbed from the record. I want her name remembered, quietly, internally. As a warning, not to shame her, but so no one like her ever rises again without accountability." Trevor coughed. "We'll handle it." Derek nodded. Then he sat back down, his body finally sinking slightly into the cushions. For the first time in hours, he let out a small sigh. Not of relief, but of release. He had climbed out of the burning wreckage. But now came the rebuilding. A knock came at the door. It was Maria, the kind flight attendant who had taken over during the flight. She stepped in hesitantly, her smile unsure. "I just wanted to check." "On her," she said, nodding towards Zuri. Derek nodded. "She's resting. Thank you for how you treated her, and me." Maria gave a small smile. "I have a niece her age. I saw what happened. We need more people like you," Derek said, standing again. "People who see." She paused. I've always wanted to become a trainer for new crew. I want to change things." Derek extended his hand. "You just did." Maria shook it, her eyes bright, then quietly exited the room. Zuri stirred on the couch. "Died. I'm here, little star. Are we going home?" "Soon." "Good," she whispered, drifting back. "Home is better." Derek held her tiny hand in his and looked out the window once more. He had won today, but the real battle had just begun. It didn't take long. By the time Derek and Zuri were ushered into a private car bound for the Clarendon Suites in downtown Halston, the world had already caught wind of what happened on Flight OS 1186. A grainy, vertical video filmed from the business class cabin, exactly 39 seconds long, was uploaded to social media by a teenage passenger whose mother sat one row behind Derek. As they sat at a computer lab on a final take, Derek had captured the moment the police entered. Susan pointed her finger, and a small girl clutched her father's arm with terrified eyes. The caption read, "This flight attendant called the cops on a black dad and his little girl. Turns out he owns the airline." By the time their car reached the hotel, it had 2.3 million views. Inside the black Mercedes SUV, Zuri had fallen asleep again. Her head lay across Derek's lap, her fingers curled into his jacket like she was still afraid he might disappear. The driver, aware of who he was chauffeuring, said nothing beyond, "Good afternoon, sir," and "Would you like the scenic route?" He knew better than to ask what had happened. Everyone would know soon enough. Derek held his phone in one hand, watching the notifications stacked like bricks. Missed calls from corporate, emails from PR, requests for interviews, a ping from his assistant back in Chicago. "KNN wants a comment. They have the passenger video." He didn't respond. His thumb hovered over the Twitter app, the blue bird icon pulsing like a dare. One click, and the world would become a courtroom. He opened it. At the top of his feed was the video. Under it, retweets from politicians, celebrities, activists. Flight 1186 and Little Zuri were both trending worldwide. He tapped play. The audio was shaky but clear, Susan's voice pointed and shrill. "That's him, row 3. That's the man who has been threatening me, him and his child." Then silence, as the camera zoomed on Zuri, wide-eyed and frozen, her small fingers grasping her father's sleeve. Derek's voice wasn't caught on the video, but Zuri's eyes were. They said everything. He exited the app, locking his phone, and looked out the window. Halston's skyline shimmered through the haze of afternoon. He didn't feel vindicated, not yet. He felt exposed. The hotel had cleared out the private elevator bank for his arrival. Staff members didn't make eye contact, but he felt their curiosity like a fog. Their suite was large and silent, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Zuri was carried in gently by one of the bell staff, still wrapped in her fleece blanket. Derek tipped heavily and shut the door behind them. He sat her on the bed, pulled the shades, and let her sleep. Then he went to the desk and opened his laptop. His inbox was a war zone. Subject: "You urgent. CEO. Statement required." Subject: "Repressure from investors." Subject: "Your face is on everything." One email was from his college friend, now an editor at a major news outlet. Tell your story, D, before someone else tells it for you. He sat there for a long moment, the cursor blinking in an empty reply box. Then, slowly, he began to type. Not to corporate, not to PR, to the world. He opened a blank draft and began with a line he hadn't planned. My name is Derek Amanpour, and today I watched the world decide who my daughter was, before she even had a chance to speak. He kept going. He didn't write as a CEO. He wrote as a father. He wrote about Zuri's pink backpack, the water glass, the salt, the trembling lip, the voice inside him that said, "Be calm, be good, be safe," even while the storm around him screamed the opposite. He wrote about the rage he swallowed and the fear he had to hide. Not for his sake, for hers. When he was done, he clicked post. Then he shut the laptop. Zuri stirred. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, are we still in the sky?" "No, baby, we're safe. We're in the hotel now." "Do we have to go back on the airplane?" "Not today," he said softly. She nodded, then looked toward the window. "It's really bright out there. Would you like to go see Big Ben tomorrow?" She thought. "Only if there's ice cream too." Derek smiled. Deal. They spent the evening quiet. He ordered room service, grilled cheese, tomato soup and fruit for Zuri, tea and a club sandwich for himself. Zuri drew on hotel stationery with the pen from his coat pocket, doodling a crown with the word Zuri under it. "Can I make my own club someday?" she asked. "What kind of club?" "A club where kids don't get yelled at, or stared at, or pointed at." Derek paused. "That's a beautiful club. You can be in it too," she said, "because you're good at making scary people go away." And he didn't know what to say. She nodded. Later that night, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Trevor Daniels. "She's gone." Batch turned him. "HR's handling the rest." He didn't reply. A second message followed. "The video's gone viral. Board members are asking questions. They want a meeting." He responded this time, 3 words only. "Make it happen." The next morning, Derek woke early, before the sun, before Zuri. He sat by the window sipping coffee and watched the city start its day. People walking, buses moving, lives continuing as if the world hadn't just split in half on a runway the night before. His phone pinged with a calendar invite. Emergency board session, 4:00 p.m., remote link provided. The caption under his post had grown to hundreds of thousands of comments. Some angry, some stunned, but many supportive. Stories poured in from others, quiet voices now emboldened, people who had been whispered about, sidelined, doubted. A few thought the world wasn't fair yet, but it was watching. And maybe, just maybe, it was listening too. The board meeting started at exactly 4:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 12 windows flickered into life on Derek's screen, each square holding a face that looked somewhere between apprehensive and corporate calm. Leather chairs, crisp collars, coffee cups. No one dared start the meeting before Derek logged on. When his camera activated and his name flashed below it, Derek Amanpour, CEO, Jetstream Aviation Holdings, the temperature in the room shifted. "Good afternoon," he said evenly, his voice clipped but unshaken. A chorus of muted greetings followed. "Derek, glad you're here. We've got a lot to unpack." Unpack was a choice. Derek sat straight in the armchair of his suite. Zuri playing quietly in the other room with her sketchpad and markers. She didn't know the world was waiting for her father's next move. That one word from him could tilt the balance of a billion-dollar company. "I assume you've all seen the footage," Derek began, "and my statement." A few nods, a few weary exhales. "We have," said Byron Grant, the board's vice chair. "And we're deeply sorry. What happened on OS 1186 is unacceptable, and, well, it's also created a substantial public relations liability." There it was. Not racism, not harm, a liability. "Let's speak plainly," Derek said, his voice tightening like a belt pulled too tight. "A uniformed employee of our subsidiary airline profiled my daughter. Not accidentally, not mistakenly, systemically, deliberately. She called the police on a 7-year-old girl and her father. That girl was terrified. That father, me, was humiliated. And you're concerned about the fallout." "It's not just fallout," piped in Eleanor McCain, the chief legal counsel. "It's potential exposure. The lawsuits, Derek. We could be looking at a class action from past passengers, reputational damage among our partners in the EU, even license scrutiny from aviation authorities." Derek didn't blink. "Good," he said. Eleanor paused, confused. "Good?" "Yes," Derek repeated. "Because it means people are finally paying attention. The rot has always been there. The system didn't malfunction. It performed exactly as it was built to." Silence followed. Then Byron leaned forward. "So what are you proposing?" Derek looked each of them in the eye, square by square. He saw the discomfort, the fear, the need to contain. "I'm not proposing a press release," he said, "or a quiet settlement. We're going public with a reform initiative. We'll investigate past complaints, not just Susan Whitmore's, all of them, across every subsidiary. I want a task force built by Monday. Every passenger who's ever filed a discrimination complaint in the last 10 years will be reviewed. And every single one of those passengers will get a direct response. A personal apology if appropriate, compensation if necessary. Closure, period." "Derek, this could open the floodgates," said Robert Weiss, the CFO. "We don't have the bandwidth to handle that volume of scrutiny." "Then we make bandwidth," Derek said. "This isn't just about a flight attendant and a glass of water. This is about culture, our culture." No one had a response. He kept going. "I've also authorized the creation of a new division. It's called the Zuri Project. It will handle equity training, de-escalation protocols, and employee accountability across our aviation brands. Every new hire, every tenured employee, every uniformed officer who partners with our airline. And I want it mandatory, not optional." "You're naming it after your daughter?" Eleanor asked. Derek's voice softened. "Yes, because that's whose face you all saw on the news." And for a second, even the board fell silent. Faces that normally debated acquisitions and fuel hedge strategies sat quietly, watching a father lead not with vengeance, but with vision. Byron cleared his throat. "And the former purser, Susan Whitmore?" "Terminated," Derek said. "Access revoked. HR is finalizing the paperwork. She will never work in this industry again. But more importantly, we will use her actions as a case study, not to shame her, but to teach others what unchecked bias looks like in a uniform." Robert nodded. "So? You're using the moment." "No," Derek said. "I'm flipping it. This moment doesn't belong to Susan, or me. It belongs to Zuri, and to every person who's ever been made to feel small in a space they paid to enter." A ping appeared in his peripheral vision, another message going viral, another tweet, another news crawl on the TV in the corner. But Derek gave a look. He ended the meeting with 5 final words. "You have your marching orders." Then he clicked "Leave meeting." As the screen went black, he exhaled for the first time in an hour. He stood up, stretched, and walked into the bedroom, where Zuri was sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing a son wearing sunglasses. "Is your meeting over, Daddy?" "Here, sweetheart." "Did you win?" He crouched down beside her. "We don't win right away. but we do the work." She thought for a moment. "Can I help?" "You already did." He kissed her forehead and smiled. The world outside was loud, swirling, watching. But in this room, it was quiet. For now. And somewhere deep in Derek's chest, the roar of justice was just beginning. The email arrived in Karen Whitmore's inbox at 7:03 a.m. Eastern Time. It was a plain message. No frills, no greetings, no warnings. Just one sentence. "You are hereby notified that your employment with Orion Skies has been terminated, effective immediately." She stared at the screen in her bathrobe, blinking at the words like they were some foreign code she couldn't decipher. Her hand trembled slightly as she scrolled down to the attached termination letter, an official PDF signed by the director of HR and CC'd to 2 legal department representatives. There was no fanfare, no phone call, no in-person meeting. Just silence, and then erasure. Her access to the airline's internal portal was already gone. Her badge had been deactivated overnight. The app where she picked up shifts now showed a gray error screen. By 8:15 a.m., the local news had picked up the story. Not her name. Not yet. But her flight, the incident, the CEO, the daughter. The words racial profiling, false report, and public humiliation were splashed across every banner, tweeted in every trending post. And in a matter of hours, someone did name her. A passenger from OS 1186 had posted a photo, a blurry image of her mid-galley, face frozen in a scowl, finger pointed toward a seat. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Reddit threads exploded, her Facebook inbox filled with messages, some angry, some mocking, some threatening. "You should be ashamed. Racist witch. 30 years in the sky, and this is your legacy?" She shut her laptop, but the damage had already bled through the seams of her life. The HOA president at her gated community had left a voicemail asking her to consider taking a low profile during this time. Her niece had texted saying she was getting asked about Aunt Karen at school. The irony that her name, Karen, was now shorthand for entitled racism wasn't lost on her. Not today. By lunchtime, she tried to call her union rep. It went straight to voicemail. Then the doorbell rang. 2 men in gray polos with the Orion Skies logo stood outside. Not cops, not press, security contractors. They handed her a manila envelope containing a checklist. Badge returned, uniform inventory, compliance document. "We'll wait," one said. She fumbled through her closet, retrieving her neatly pressed jackets, her lanyard, the scarf with Orion's silver pin that she used to wear with quiet pride. The uniform that had once made her feel invincible now felt like a costume she wasn't allowed to wear anymore. As she handed over the items, the older security officer glanced at her and asked, not unkindly, "You okay?" She didn't answer. She just shut the door. At Jetstream HQ, meanwhile, the legal team was in overdrive. Derek stood at the edge of the 12th floor conference room, arms crossed, watching as Robert Maxwell, Eleanor McCain, and a half-dozen policy advisors flipped through paper after paper. 17 complaints, Eleanor said, tapping the printed file on the conference table. 9 from minority passengers, 3 from fellow flight attendants, and only 2 were ever officially escalated. Robert shook his head. "How the hell did we miss this?" "We didn't miss it," Derek said. "We buried it." He let the words settle in. "This wasn't an anomaly," he continued. "This was a warning system, and every time it went off, we disabled the alarm. This is what corporate silence buys us." Across the room, an intern, barely out of college, face flushed with nerves, raised his hand. "Sir? The press is requesting comment on the internal investigation. Do we have a public statement ready?" Derek took the paper from his hand and read it aloud. "Orion Skies condemns all forms of discrimination and is committed to providing a safe and equitable experience for every passenger. He looked up, jaw tight. Rewrite it. I want it personal. I want it real. This isn't just a PR nightmare. This is a moral test. The room nodded. By late afternoon, the media was buzzing about the newly announced Zuri project. Derek had gone public with the details: training programs, scholarship funds, a whistleblower hotline, and a direct reporting line to the executive suite. News anchors described it as sweeping, historic, a model for airline accountability. But Derek wasn't looking for praise. He was looking for change. In a quiet corner of the lounge, he sat beside Zuri, watching her color a picture of a crown surrounded by stars. "Can I ask you something, Daddy?" she said, not looking up. "You forget. Why do people get mad when we sit in the fancy seats?" He paused. He reached for the right words, careful not to crush her joy, but not willing to lie. "Some people think certain seats belong to certain people," he said slowly. "But that's not true. You belong anywhere you're treated with kindness, and if someone forgets that, we remind them." Zuri nodded. Then she colored the crown pink. That evening, Derek received a message from an unlikely source. Mrs. Ellen Granger. She had found his corporate email through a news article and sent a single paragraph. "Mr. Amanpour, I was on OS 1186, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for standing tall. Thank you for protecting your daughter with dignity. And thank you for using your voice when so many others would have stayed silent. I saw everything, and I will never forget the look on your face when you said this is over. It gave me hope." Derek replied within the hour. He wrote, "Thank you, Mrs. Granger. I'll never forget what you did either." Later that night, long after the calls had ended and the statements were approved, Derek stepped out onto the balcony of his hotel suite, overlooking the London skyline. The city twinkled below, calm, humming, busy. They stood still. Because even now, after the reckoning, after the headlines, after the firings, he knew the story wasn't over. It's over. He knew it would happen again to someone else. And he knew the only way forward was to keep walking. Zuri Amanpour twirled slowly in the middle of the Windsor Suite's grand lounge, her pink glitter shoes making soft scuffs against the polished marble floor. In her hand was a golden paper crown, folded precisely with stickers pressed along the front, stars, suns, and a heart with a smiley face. A lounge attendant had helped her make it while her father met with very serious people in very serious suits behind a glass door. The lounge attendant, Janice, had whispered to Zuri, "I've never seen anyone get this much attention up here before, not even celebrities. Your dad must be somebody very special." Zuri had smiled. She already knew. By the time Derek emerged, the meeting was over, the path forward decided, and the weight that had clung to his shoulders for the last 48 hours was beginning to lift. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled to his forearms, the top button of his dress shirt undone. He spotted Zuri instantly and walked over. She stood tall, holding the crown toward him. "Your Highness," she said with a giggle, "do you accept this royal honor for protecting the princess?" Derek knelt down, letting her place the flimsy crown on his head. "I accept with honor," he said, his voice warm and low, "but only if I get a hug too." She wrapped her arms around him, small and fierce. Behind them, Janice dabbed her eyes with a tissue. They stayed like that for a while, father and daughter, crown and all, until Derek finally stood and said, "You ready to meet someone important?" Zuri nodded. In the corner of the lounge, a tall black woman in a tailored gray pantsuit waited near a leather armchair. Her name was Loretta Gaines, chairwoman of the Orion Skies Board. She had come not for formality or damage control, but because she had insisted. "I've been waiting to shake your hand," Loretta said to Derek as he approached. She had the kind of presence that didn't shout for attention, it claimed it. "I've heard 1,000 stories this week," she continued, from PR teams, legal counsel, security. But I only needed one. Yours. Derek accepted her hand, firm and deliberate. You're not just cleaning up a mess, she said. You're shifting the ground beneath this company, and we're going to follow your lead. Zuri peeked out from behind her dad's leg. Loretta crouched down to her level and smiled. And you, young lady, are the bravest person I've heard about all week. Zuri tilted her head, unsure. Because you didn't hide. You stood tall in your seat. That takes guts. Zuri beamed. And I didn't even cry when the salt fell. Loretta laughed. Then you've already got more poise than most adults I know. By the end of the hour, Derek had a plan in motion, one that stretched far beyond press conferences and policy changes. The Zuri Foundation, named for his daughter, would receive direct support from the airline and its parent company. Its goal, to fund young leaders from underrepresented communities in aviation, hospitality, and corporate leadership. But the mission was deeper than that. It was about creating spaces where no child would feel like they didn't belong. Later that week, after the media frenzy had cooled, Derek and Zuri strolled the cobblestone walkways of London's South Bank, bundled in scarves, sipping hot chocolate from paper cups. They stopped at a small overlook across from Big Ben. There it is, Derek said, pointing. The big clock. Zuri leaned into the railing. Is that the one that goes bong bong? Every hour on the hour. Can we stay until it bongs? He looked at his watch. 15 minutes. They waited in the golden dusk, watching boats drift along the Thames. Tourists took selfies nearby, street performers juggled fire, and the city pulsed gently with the rhythm of early evening. And then it came. Deep, resonant, unmistakable. Bong. Zura gasped and clapped. It really does. Derek chuckled. Told you. She leaned her head against his side. Betty? Yay. Little star. Will people be nicer now because of what happened? He looked out at the skyline. I hope so, he said. But even if they aren't, we'll keep reminding them. Zuri thought for a moment. Can we write a book about it? He smiled. What would you call it? She tapped her chin. The Girl in Seat 2A. That's a perfect title. A breeze passed over them, crisp and clean, and for the first time in days, Derek felt peace. Not the kind born of relief, but the kind forged through resilience. He looked down at his daughter. She wore her paper crown again, slightly bent at one corner, glitter-smudged, still proud on her head. She didn't know that her story had changed laws, sparked reforms, and launched a movement. She just knew she was seen, she knew she mattered. And that was more than enough. Far away, in a quiet suburban neighborhood back in the States, Karen sat on her front porch, wrapped in a sweater, sipping cold coffee. She had unplugged her phone, ignored her inbox, and turned off the news. The world had moved on, but not her. She watched kids ride bikes down the street, heard a neighbor's dog bark, but it all felt dim. Inside, the TV still showed clips from the news cycle. Her name had faded, but the impact hadn't. She clicked it off, stared at the blank screen, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know who she was without the uniform. Back in London, Zuri tucked into bed at the hotel, warm under thick covers. Derek kissed her forehead. Night, little star. Night, Daddy. He turned off the lamp, but before he walked to the door, she whispered, Hey, Daddy. Yeah. Thank you for standing up for me. He turned back, heart full. Always, he said. That's my job. As he stepped into the hallway and closed the door gently behind him, Derek Amanpour didn't feel like a CEO or a public figure. He felt like a father, one who had done the right thing, one who had told the truth when it counted, and one who had, in the end, helped his daughter keep her crown.